Welcome back to West Lafayette, Indiana for the 2017 Swimming and Diving Championships. Here are the women's. We are in day 2. We are in the first prelims, though, and we are done with the swimming portion for this morning, and we are now on to the 1-meter prelim diving portion of today. And I am joined by Purdue Boilermaker on the men's diving team, Max Showalter. Max, thanks for coming and spending part of your Thursday morning with us here.
Thank you for having me.
We've got 46 divers today. We each have 5 dives. It's the 1 meter. They will compete then in the finals tonight. And we take a look at our first set of divers here. And this is going to go pretty fast-paced, isn't it, Max?
Yeah, the 1 meter, there's not a lot of time in between, so we'll be dive one after another.
And, just kind of maybe take us through what exactly are we looking for here in this 1 meter dive. We've already we talked about kind of off air who in this group of 46 are really the divers to watch. Obviously in that 8th spot, Yu Zhao from Minnesota, she won last year. We know she's pretty good, but maybe who else are we kind of watching in this first flight?
So some of the big competitors aside from Yu Zhao from Minnesota would be her teammate Sarah Bacon. She was a national team member growing up, trained here in Indianapolis with John Wingfield on the national team. The 2 IU divers, Mikhail Bauer and Jessica Parado. Mikhail qualified to World University Games this summer in Taiwan, and Jessica Parado is our returning Olympian from IU from Rio 2016. Then we have Kristen Hayden from University of Michigan, competed this past winter in Kazan, Russia for the Junior World Championship. She's a freshman who's had an absolutely outstanding season. And then Samantha Reese and Morgan Meixner from Purdue have been consistently in the top for Purdue on 1 meter this past season.
As we get started here with Laura Tarut from Ohio State.
So she started out with the inward 1.5 pike, which is what you're going to see a lot of the girls starting with their easier degree of difficulties, their front and inward entries. I thought that was executed very well, got a 46. I thought she ducked her head just a little on the entry, so if she kept it up, it would have been straighter in.
And now Cornell from Penn State.
That's a solid start for Cornell from Penn State. I thought she pressed straight up right at the board. She kept a tight body line. It looked super clean going through the water. I think she'll be happy.
Now we have
Callie Head from Iowa.
43.7. As you can see here, we've got 46 divers in the prelims, so this will be a relatively quick kind of pace between divers.
Callie Head starting with the front 1.5 pike, an easier dive. It was clean. I thought it was a little bit far out from the springboard for such an easy dive.
You see Callie Head there from Iowa.
Really nice. I thought she could have waited a little longer on the springboard. She pulled it back with her shoulders a little bit, which gave her a little bit of distance, but overall I think that's a really strong start for Head.
35.7. Addison, 52.33 D.
Addison Łukowiak from Rutgers. She started with one of her higher degree of difficulties. That's back 1.5, 1.5. So back 1.5 somersault, 1.5 twist. That's a 2.5. And she got 45 points on that.
Rosendahl from Northwestern now.
Olivia Rosendahl is also a very strong contender in this competition. She has loads of international experience behind her, mainly as a platform specialist, but the cool thing about platform is it transfers down to all your springboards. And that was really, really strong for her. She kept her head up on the start. She rolled it by a little bit on the bottom, but that'll put her in a nice position.
So you talked about your platform experience is able to transition to the springboard.
Yes.
Why is that?
Platform is a very mental game. So for most people who specialize in platform, they're going to be doing all their dives off 10 meter. So anything lower than that is pretty much cake. So the people who are specializing, when I'll use the term spotting throughout the broadcast. And spotting is when you pick up your visual cues on each somersault so you know where you are, so you can have a more accurate come out and a cleaner entry. It's a lot easier when basically your body depends on it and your life depends on it when you're up on 10 meter to bring it down. Right.
That makes sense. So this is a piece of cake, because if you hit the water here, it doesn't hurt nearly as bad from a meter.
It always hurts, but 10 meters is brutal. We have Yu Zhao, or Shelly, from Minnesota up. She's the reigning Big Ten champion on this event. What's funny is Shelly, like many divers, started out as a gymnast. So she's from China, and I watched an interview with her recently where it said her mom brought her to, she was a gymnast and she didn't like it, and her mom brought her to Beijing to start training diving. But that was an absolutely phenomenal start. I thought that was a beautiful back 1.5 pike. I thought she pressed perfectly, and the entry was super clean.
I know last night we were talking about on the broadcast that is the background story of a lot of divers, is they start in gymnastics, but it's so hard on your body that a lot of them they can't take it, and they get out, and diving is similar.
Yeah, I also started as a gymnast I was a gymnast for 7 years, and growing up through the gymnastics circuit, it just murders your body. Not that diving is much easier, especially as a platform specialist, but it's less physically demanding on the body. So this is Mikhail Bauer from IU. Great inward 1.5 pike by Mikhail. I thought she got her arms through. She had a super clean entry. You can see all the divers on a front and a inward entry will do what's called a pike save. So they'll do an extra half somersault under the water to suck as much air down, which gives you a smaller splash.
So far, Shelly from Michigan, our leader through, got our first 15 divers or so.
That was Hazel from Wisconsin. Madison doing dive inward 1.5 pike. I thought it was a little heavy on the bottom. I thought she could have been cleaner and more precise with where she put her hands. Then we have Anna Filippic coming in from Nebraska. Great start. Anna has such a powerful hurdle, which is what you don't see a lot of on women's 1 meter, because usually you see the big height coming from the men, and that's something that really sets Anna apart from a lot of these divers, is she can get the big points from jumping so high. That was Rachel Byron from Rutgers doing full twisting 1.5. You're going to see a lot of these girls start with their easier dives just to play it safe going in. You always have high nerves, anxiety your first couple rounds, and then as we get later into the competition, you'll start to see the more complicated dives.
Right, so, like we talked about, you get 5 dives. So for you personally, do you start with the easiest one first and then just kind of slowly ratchet up the difficulty, or like in dive 4, 3 or 4, do you decide I'm going to try to do the toughest one because I feel like I'm in a rhythm?
I'll usually start with a front entry, so I'll forward or an inward entry. That way that sort of takes the nerves off. That I'm not focusing on, okay, this is a back or reverse, so it's a blind entry. So I'll usually start with a twisting dive or a front dive just because it loosens me up. If I miss that, I can always come back with my higher degrees of difficulty later. And then we just saw Jessica Parado from IU do inward 1.5 pike. She is a 2016 U.S. Olympian in the women's 10-meter. She was third in the prelims and then second in the semifinals. That was back 1.5. I thought it was a little short. I thought she pulled with her shoulders and she didn't really let her legs snap up to finish the rest of the somersault.
You talked about Parado being an Olympian. I think a lot of people who maybe don't stay super locked into the swimming and diving world, especially at the collegiate level, would be shocked to know how many Olympians do come out of the Big Ten.
Absolutely. The Big Ten is a powerhouse when it comes to Olympians. I know on our men's side we have Steele Johnson, who's the Olympic silver medalist from Rio in the men's 10-meter synchronized platform, who dove with his partner, who is also from Purdue, David Badaya. Mary Beth Dunahey from Purdue, Jessica Parado, James Conner, Michael Hickson, all Big Ten Olympians, and then that doesn't include all the swimmers.
Right. I mean, we were talking about it last night. We've got Lily King, who at IU obviously was a gold medalist in Rio. You know, there's an immense amount of talent across the board. You know, 1 through 13, and it's really impressive. You know, to kind of see that. I think a lot of people often really only pay attention to maybe some of the bigger sports, you know, basketball, football.
Absolutely, right.
But like, you know, and swimming and diving is as talented in the Big Ten as it is anywhere in the country.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to diving, Indiana is the state of Indiana is just a powerhouse when it comes to diving. The national team, the U.S. National Training Center was based out of IUPUI with the head coach John Wingfield. Since then, the program has been disbanded, but that's where you're going to see a lot of the Big Ten divers sort of come from. Steele Johnson trained there, Jessica Parado, Sarah Bacon, who's in this 1-meter event also, all trained under John Wingfield, and usually tend to stay more local in the Big Ten.
Right.
.4, Janica 403E.
We've got Janica from Northwestern here with her first dive.
I thought that was good. I thought if she kept her head up a little bit more, it would have set her up in a better direction to sort of drive her hips up and finish that somersault a little bit higher.
.4, Elizabeth 403B.
Elizabeth Ederman from Minnesota. The Minnesota women's team is just an absolute powerhouse in the Big Ten right now. They have such consistent girls, from Shelley all the way through to Sarah Bacon, Lexi Tenenbaum, who's one of their tower specialists. They're just overall a very well-rounded out team.
Julia 5233D.
And you talk about that Minnesota, that has to be, you know, in large part due to the credit of their head coach, their head diving coach, Wimbo Chin,
Yep.
who, you know, has to do a great job. You know, Minnesota, especially from a recruiting standpoint, it's maybe not the prettiest place in the United States to come to unless you really, really like cold weather.
Right.
But, you know, that even still, he's able, you know, they're able to bring in, like you said, so much consistency in that program.
That's the thing with diving is when a lot of the elite level divers are sort of looking for places to go, that head coach is just such a driving factor, as they have the reputation behind them. Wenbo has been proven to develop champions, so I think that's he's so well spoken and educated in diving that his recruits are like almost in awe of what he knows. So I think that's one of like the big driving factors to Minnesota, is just the whole legacy of Minnesota diving, like backing that. Same goes with Ohio State, IU, Purdue. They all their coaches have been proven to develop champions.
And that's the biggest, the key to success in recruiting is you have to have that pedigree, because then you're able to to go to those elite recruits and just say, well,
Right.
look what we've done. You know, in Purdue's case, you are able to say, you know, we've got Steele Johnson, we've got David Bodile, like we've got these two swimmers who have been to the Olympics and had a lot of success, and that makes it really easy to, you know, or makes it much easier to recruit.
It helps internationally too. So Emily Meany just went from Purdue. She is from Australia. She competed at the World Cup or the Olympic qualifier event this past February in Brazil, which qualified to the 2016 Olympics. And we have a ton of international divers in this event, and I think that that's what pulls them so heavily towards the U.S. is knowing the winning reputation that these Big Ten coaches have behind them. That's a good start for the Michigan State diver, Madeline Sewell, doing back 1.5 somersault with 1.5 twist. Again, one of the higher degree of difficulties for the first starting round at a 2.5. So you're going to see a lot of the girls will be doing the same dives because women's 1 meter is such a 1 meter in general. You're going to see the same dives repeated over and over again because you don't have a lot of space to be doing all the extra somersaults and twists. So what's really going to come down is the deciding factor is you need to be on, and there is little room for error in an event that is so precise. Pulled that by just a bit. You'll see it on a lot of back 1.5 pikes as divers tend to drop their legs and sort of pull the entry in. I think she just got a little bit excited with a good takeoff and just left her feet a little bit high and washed over. Christina Crowell from Penn State. Front 2.5 pike with a degree of difficulty of 2.6. That was clean. I thought it was a little bit out. Her head dropped, which sort of pushed her out into the middle of the pool, which makes it harder. When your head drops on your takeoff of a front, it makes it easier or harder to keep it up when you go in for the entry.
And you can see, you know, obviously with the springboard, you want to get as vertical as you can, but as pretty much on as straight of a line as you can.
Yeah.
Like you talked about, you don't want to get pushed out into the further into the pool.
Right, and it's hard because the springboard's natural job as it bends is to push you away from the board. So that's when a lot of the technique of keeping your chest up, keeping your core tight, so when the board goes to push you away, you can push your hips up or drive your hips back up to stay closer to the board. Just washed a little bit by on that front 2.5 tuck. This is diver 31 out of 46. So after 31 divers, we have Shelly from Minnesota leading with a 56.35.
It's not really that surprising to see Shelly there atop the leaderboard. Talked about she is the defending champion.
I think Shelly sort of comes into this competition setting the precedent of what you need to do if you want to be in those top 3 spots.
And one thing to watch, for NCAA qualifying, you need a score of 265 or better. Don't know that we'll see that today in the prelims. Probably not. More about setting up for finals. But you never know. The meet record is 370.30. That was set by Kelsey Bryant.
Yep, 2012 Olympic silver medalist in the women's 3-meter synchro with her synchro partner Abby Johnston, who dove at Duke. Abby Johnston also has the ACC record for women's 1 meter. This is Thelma from Iowa. I thought that was a really, really well executed inward 1.5. Like, I have little complaint about it.
403B.
And that was good enough to put her tied for 6th.
Yep. Got the Michigan State girls making a lot of noise for their divers.
Yeah, the environment has really changed with the swimming portion being over. A lot of the parents, the fans, kind of cleared out. It is kind of that natural break where
Yeah.
we've got a couple hours between the end of prelims and the start of finals.
That's what's so fun about these conference meets, as opposed to like the NCAA championships or the divers have zones which qualifies them to the NCAA championships. Big Ten that's when you're fully together as the entire team, and that's when it just gets super loud. Competing last year in the Big Ten finals in this event it's different than any meet that you compete at because the team and the atmosphere is just so electric. Whereas NCAAs, you don't have that big of a cheering squad. You only get the really big cheers if you put a dive down.
Right. Yeah, I know last year, with that being my first year broadcasting the men's Big Ten championships, I was absolutely blown away by the atmosphere during the events. Just, it's not just, your teammates, it's parents, it's other, it's fans, everybody. I thought it was really interesting. Pretty much everyone knows all the cheers. Everybody's very in sync, and it's a fun atmosphere. And if you have a chance, if you're listening, I would highly recommend get out to an event, to a final.
Absolutely.
It's so fun. It's as electrifying as you can find anywhere in athletics.
It's almost a sort of mutual understanding for the hard work that the athletes have put in at this point. It's you know how hard they've all worked, and to make it to a Big Ten final, it's just you give them the respect of like, all right, here's all your hard work paying off. Even if the dive isn't that great, you're still going to come out of the water and you're going to hear fans going crazy for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't really matter as much as the score, like you said. It's a salute to all the hours and the time that you've put in just to even reach that spot.
We see Kristen Hayden from University of Michigan doing a front 2.5 pike, starting out with a 2.6. Like I said earlier with Anna Filipic from Nebraska, something that Kristen also has is she has incredibly strong legs, and she does that hop hurdle, so that gives her the advantage of getting that height on the board, which the judges love to see. Sam Reese, full twisting 1.5 with a 2.2 degree of difficulty. I thought she lifted her head or her chest a little bit on the bottom, which caused that sort of backsplash, which could have been a little bit cleaner, but I think it's a solid start for the Purdue diver.
And so now we have Thomas from Iowa. That is his diver 40 of 46.
Very clean entry. Again, a little bit out, but I think that's the sort of entry that you're going to want to look for in this competition.
46.8, Haley, 403B.
And so we have reached the final few divers here for the first round.
Haley Allen, the Midland, Texas native, trains with Justin Socher, starts out with an inward 1.5 pike. I think her form is just beautiful. Haley has very long legs, which is really good for accentuating that line when you go through the water, which the judges really like to see.
50.4, Katrina, 105C.
And her score of a 50.4 is good enough to tie her for 7th.
Yep. You can see the girls who are going to be contenders for that top 8 spot are going to want to be averaging around the 50 to 53 mark if they really want to be in contention for those top 3 spots and secure themselves a place in the final in the top 8.
45.6, Madeline, 5132D.
Madeline, one of the 2 University of Illinois divers represented in this women's 1 meter preliminary. Starts out with a full twisting 1.5. Just ducked her head a little bit on that entry, causing a little bit of a splash going over.
.4, Alessandra, 5132D.
After this first round, you'll sort of see during this first round, you'll see all the women start to be very close to each other. There's not going to be a lot of degree of separation, but as the competition starts to go on, you'll see the top 4 or 5 girls start to break away from the pack, and then it usually ends up being a battle for those last few spots in the women's final.
Right, because we had talked about, you know, this first round of dives is your real basic dive. It's
Right.
You know, be able to get your feet underneath you really, and just kind of, like you said, you usually use something that you know you can shake the nerves off of with, and it's not the end of the world if you don't execute it perfectly.
Yeah. Just something to get you moving, settle your adrenaline down. Adrenaline, while it's a great thing, can sort of be like you get the dive, you're so nervous and you want the dive to just be so great, and then you make dumb little mistakes which can end up haunting you.
Right, it can be, you know, both a blessing and a curse.
Absolutely. That's Sarah Bacon from Minnesota. Talked about her earlier. Her and Shelly, I think, are some of the 2 top girls to compete with. Really, really solid inward 1.5 pike to start her off.
And like you said, we take a look at the end of, you know, this first round. You talked about Shelly and Sarah kind of being the top 2 contenders, and sure enough, they're the 2 at the top of the score board right now. Everybody else really tightly contested, and we'll see if anyone's able to kind of separate themselves from the pack here in this second round.
Yep. So we have Shelly and Sarah Bacon, respectively 1 and 2, and then Kristen Hayden from Michigan is our 3rd spot, tied with Abigail from University of Nebraska. It's a good front 2.5 pike by the Penn State diver. Thought she let her core loose. That's one of the things is there's so many little pieces that go into each individual dive that something as simple as not flexing your stomach will make you lose your body line and can cost you points.
And that has to be frustrating because
absolutely
you can lose those points, like you said, is something real simple. You have to have the utmost concentration and focus when you're up there to perform your dive.
Yeah. I love talking to other divers because what a lot of parents or spectators will ask me is, what do you think about when you're on the diving board? My answer every time is, I don't remember, because it's such a high anxiety, high adrenaline scenario that you just have you don't remember what you're thinking about.
Right, you're so focused that, you know, everything else just kind of fades from view. Is it one of those things where when you're standing on the board, are you so focused that kind of everything around you starts to kind of dull out, like your senses just kind of are dulled and you're really just focusing on, okay, I need to do this, this, and this to execute the dive?
Yeah, but then there are also certain times where your senses are just super heightened.
Yeah.
You can feel like the water on your fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
.36.8, Addison 105 feet.
That's the direction you want to see on a front 2.5 pike. You can see she kept her head up, and that's what sets you up for that really, really good direction, especially on a front 2.5 pike.
Olivia 5331D.
Olivia Rosendahl from Northwestern, always a happy diver when she's on the board.
Yeah, she's one of the few that is, you see the close-up. She's always smiling.
Mm-hmm. I tend to do that when I dive. I think it just eases the mood while you're diving. A lot of the times you get up there and you're just so nervous thinking about, like, okay, I want to do this dive the best that I can. But to smile just sort of shakes off the cobwebs.
Right, you got to stay relaxed to a certain extent.
You saw on that front 2.5 pike by the Northwestern diver, she had a good setup, but just ducked her head on the entry, which made her legs and body sort of wash over, creating the bigger splash. And then here we have our leader after the first round, Yu Zhu from Minnesota, or Shelly, Such a pretty line stepping into her hurdle. And I would expect nothing less from her. She pressed beautifully right at the water. She almost presses, when you see boys do easier dives like that, you see them press earlier, so come out of their pike or tuck position straight down at the water, and then they're able to pull their feet up. That's something the judges really like because it shows power, and I think Shell is really good at demonstrating that as a girl. And there she is right back in the top spot with a total of 113.95.
Yeah, not surprising. She showed that power coming off the board, really able to get up into the air, like you had talked about.
Mikhail Bauer from IU. Mikhail's another very strong diver. You can see just the strength in her legs as she takes off. And there's that same press that we were talking about with Shelley. She presses early, and then she's able to keep her feet up and then just pull it right around. I thought that was really, really good for Mikhail from IU.
44.85.
That'll put her right in second. Good clean entry on that front 2.5 pike. That's something you'll see a lot more on 1 meter, is the entries are a lot smaller because you don't have as much fall time. But then when it comes down to something so nitpicky, it's that you really need to have that super clean entry. Whereas on 3 meter you can get away with a little bit of a bigger entry, or 10 meter, because the judges judge you on aerial work also. Great height by Anna Filippic from Nebraska. She left her feet up a little bit high, which caused her to pull it by.
46.8. Rachel, 105 feet. Jessica, 105 feet.
Here's Jessica Parado, the IU Olympian. Great front 2.5 pike by Parado from IU.
55.9. Danny, 105C.
And that was good enough to put her in second place.
Big improvement over her first round dive too. You'll see a lot of these girls doing hop hurdles when they hop before they get their hurdle leg up, it's typical more in women's diving, but you see it a lot also in men's diving. I do a hop hurdle just because I'm not a springboard specialist, but it does give you the advantage of getting a little bit of extra movement out of the board, so you loosen it up right as you go into your hurdle step.
Helps you get that extra momentum.
Yep. Morgan Meixner from Purdue. Something that Morgan has is she has such a light step down on her hurdle. You'll see sometimes if a diver misses the board, you'll hear the clunk of the board as they go to take off, which the judges in turn do hear and then can deduct for. But even in training, I haven't seen Morgan miss the board once.
Yeah, that's definitely impressive. You know, that requires a lot of timing and.
It's a lot of patience. That's really all. Such a major factor of diving is patience. A lot of people, when they're doing harder dives, want to get up there and they get so nervous that they just want to like chuck their shoulders or pull their legs up as fast as they can. But the board is designed to do all the work. You need to have air sense and all of that. So when you see a really beautiful diver like Greg Louganis, for instance, Greg was always good at, even if he would have a bad hurdle, you could hear it wouldn't be that loud because he knew exactly how to react to it because he was patient and wouldn't get anxious when he would hear that board stomp. A really famous quote by Greg is, anyone can be a good diver with a good hurdle, but it takes an expert to be good on a bad hurdle.
Right, yeah, I mean, like you said, it's so much about patience, which can be tough because you're up there and you're all alone. It's a little bit different than, necessarily like swimming where you're not really by yourself.
Right.
Up and diving, it's just you up there.
It's just you, and it comes down to such little split-second fraction decisions that you need to make so fast that can make or break the dive. If you have a bad hurdle, you need to decide at that moment, right as you hear you're not going to catch the board, how you're going to react to it.
Right. So is that something that when you're training, do you intentionally try to have maybe a bad hurdle every once in a while to kind of get yourself adjusted? Like if this happens during during an actual dive, I'm prepared for it and I can make that decision mentally.
I wouldn't say it's something that you're like, all right, I'm going to have a bad hurdle on this one. You try to train consistently that you will always have a good hurdle, which is what I think, going back to Morgan Meixner, she consistently trains such a good hurdle, which it's an anomaly when she has a bad one.
Mm-hmm.
But, for instance, Steele during our training sessions, if Steele has a very bad hurdle, he'll still do the dive.
Yeah.
Which is something that you all try to sort of like train through to, if you have that bad dive, it's because that bad hurdle could happen during competition. You need to know how to react to it. So if you have it in practice, a lot of the time what sets apart really good divers is they'll go on those bad hurdles, as opposed to in practice, it doesn't mean anything if you balk.
Right.
Miriam Camus from Minnesota doing back 1.5 pike. Really solid scores, even threw an 8 in there.
She currently sits in third.
We see two out of the top 3 are Minnesota divers.
And we had talked about that in that first dive. That's a credit to the quality and the depth that they have.
Of their coach, Wenbo Chen, yeah. This is Emily Meany, the Australian from Tasmania, the Purdue diver. Emily's traditionally a platform specialist. Like I said earlier, she competed in the World Cup in Brazil last February for Australia on women's 10-meter. This past year is really some of the only time that she's consistently trained 1-meter springboard. So a little bit of a shaky dive for Emily. Front 2.5 pike, dropped her head, going into the water, rolled over.
And that's understandable, like you said. If you spend your entire diving career practicing with only doing one thing,
right,
and then all of a sudden, in the span of a year, you have to learn how to do something entirely different.
Yeah,
that can be tough.
That's some of the cool thing though, is you see divers who traditionally, I keep going back to divers like Steele and Jessica Parada from IU. You see divers who are traditionally platform specialists coming down to springboard, and it's so cool to see the different aspects of their diving and how multi-dimensional it can be. Whereas there are certain people who are just springboard divers. A lot of the time you hear people like, oh, I only specialize on springboard, because it's harder to transition from springboard up to platform. But David Badai is a great example. Dave only really focused on platform, but on the occasion that he had to dive springboard, he came out and just blew the competition away. He has every Purdue record right now.
And it'll be interesting to see if Emily's able to kind of bounce back in her next dive, because especially if you have maybe a shaky dive and you're not used to doing the springboard, that can rattle you mentally. And so it's important that she's able to just kind of collect herself and say, all right, it's done, and I got to go on to the next one.
That's such a big aspect of diving too, is diving is all, one of the, I would say the biggest aspect of diving is your mental game. Is you will not hit a perfect dive every competition.
Right.
Each dive is not going to be perfect. A few times in competition, you will just tank a dive, and what sets the good divers apart the great divers, apart from just the good divers, is their ability to sort of come back and get out of the mental funk, realize, okay, that dive's behind me. It's time to move on to the next one. A perfect example of that bounce back is last year at NCAA's in Georgia Tech for girls from Miami of Ohio, a girl named Lynn Pei. Her knee buckled on a reverse 2.5 pike on 3 meter, and she fell on her back on the 3 meter springboard.
Mm-hmm.
So for everyone listening who doesn't know what a balk is, when you balk is when you do your hurdle and then you stop.
Yeah.
And you can go back and try again, but you only get one balk, and from there, 2 points are deducted from each individual judge's score. So Lin Pei balked, and then as she fell on her back, she got back up and she went to the back of the springboard, collected herself, and did the dive for 9.5s, which after the balk was 7.5s, but was still enough to keep her in the top 2.
Right. It was enough to stay competitive, and that's tough because it's hard to be able to walk back because with the pressure and understanding where you are in the moment, it can be hard to walk back and say, okay, it's done. Like
right.
I can't do anything about it now. I just need to go out and execute on the next one.
Especially when a lot of divers, you see sort of a split down the middle of divers that look at their scores during competition and divers that don't.
Mm-hmm.
You see sort of the super top divers tend to not even think about the results.
Right.
I know that Steele, right as he gets out of the water, he just sprints away.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want to hear anything about it. That's sort of what our coach Adam preaches, is nothing that you do besides your dive is going to contribute to the scores. You do what you know how to do, and
right.
then it doesn't matter where anyone else is or where you are on the scoreboard, because it shouldn't affect how hard you're trying on that dive. So
right.
a lot of the times you'll see divers get right out of the water, put their headphones on,
mm-hmm.
look away from the scoreboard, get out of the pool, anything to distract from the actual competition.
Right. So it's more of a control what you can control. Like you
right.
can't control what the judges think about your dive. You can
right.
only control how you do on it.
Right. That's what makes diving sort of frustrating at times.
Yeah.
Is it's all subjective.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to get to the level where your dives are good enough where they're forced to give you that score.
Right, and that has to be tough because you could do a dive and you could feel like it deserves a certain score, but
right.
it doesn't get that, and there's not really. It's not like you can go over and challenge the judge on
right.
well, why didn't you give me what I think it should be.
There's no replay in diving, so
right.
they could think that they saw something and then base their score on that when it might not have happened.
Right. And while the no replay can be frustrating, I think to a certain extent with so many different sporting events going to replay, I think it's really nice that it doesn't have that because it kind of still allows that human factor
totally
into it, and it allows it to create that drama.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes no replay can totally play to your advantage.
Yeah.
A lot of the time the divers can feel if they do a small twist on the bottom, but if they have a good enough entry, Adam Soldati, my coach, calls it the mind eraser. So
mm-hmm.
you can have not that great of a dive in the air, but if you put that entry on it, the judges are going to completely forget about what happened in the air because
right.
the entry is just so stunning.
Yeah, and it's like anything. The instant replay could help you in a couple
right.
instances, but it could also hurt you as well.
But a majority of the time, it would probably hurt you because
right.
in slow motion, you can see the smallest details of are their toes pointed while they're doing 3.5 somersaults backwards in
mm-hmm.
tuck.
Yeah. Take a look at Alyssa Black here from Rutgers.
That's a good dive by Alyssa. Sometimes when you see a diver going over on a back or a gainer entry, it's called a knee save, so they'll pull their knees down as fast as they can to sort of make the illusion that you're going in straight. So your knees,
mm-hmm.
as they bend, your knees will stay in that straight position going through the water, and I thought that she did a really good job demonstrating that knee save. Next we have Kristen Hayden from Michigan. She's had a great freshman season coming out, and her first meet coming in the top 2. It's a little bit short, but Kristen again has, like some of the girls we've seen in this competition, just has such strong legs and such power coming off the diving board that height really plays to her advantage. Kristen and I were teammates on our junior club team at Duke, and it's really cool seeing we both sort of got there at the same time, and it's awesome seeing her grow as that diver.
Right.
Sam Reese, the Purdue junior. Really solid front 2.5 pike. She was a little bit out, but I think that the height and control that she showed off the board was right up there with that standard of what you need to get to the women's 1 meter final.
You're kind of talking about there with Kristen being able to watch her grow. It does feel like within the diving community, it's a very tight-knit group.
Absolutely. So, aside from the NCAA scene, there's the USA diving world.
Mm-hmm.
And as you get to that upper level, we grow into like one big family. You'll see the same people at Winter National Championships and World Championship qualifiers. And it's always cool when new people sort of break onto the scene. I was never one of the divers that was super good when I was younger because I started when I was 14.
Right.
So I was late into the game. But now as I start to progress as a diver, it's sort of fun to like break onto that scene and develop these super close friendships with people who I used to just completely idolize. Like David Badaya is a perfect example.
Right.
When I started diving, it was David Badaya is
the gold standard.
He's the pinnacle of the sport.
Right.
He's like the Beyonce of diving.
Yeah.
And coming in as a freshman, I wasn't this world championship qualifier. I was just a normal junior diver who competed at national championships, and then growing closer with David and Steele sort of pushes you as a diver, and now it's like I don't think of them as these insane celebrities. They're like brothers to me now. Right.
Yeah, and it's got to be great for you because you get to go against the best at the sport, every single time, and that only has to help you get better.
Absolutely, and you see that in our practices. Steele and I are practicing Joey Cifelli, Brandon Lachavo, who are all top divers.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm going to lose to Steele on an event.
Right.
But it's fun because I'll be like, all right, Steele or Joey, like right now let's do a back 2.5 pike contest on 3 meter if we're warming up. And I know I'll lose, but it's fun just to like, because it's a super spontaneous competition, and then you never know what can happen on any given one. I can just hit the dive and they can mess up.
Right. Yeah, and that's what you talked about. That's the kind of the randomness that can occur in diving. But yeah, that competition that breeds excellence because
absolutely.
And it probably is at times frustrating with Steele because he is so good. It maybe gets frustrating at times going against him that you can never beat him. But at the same time, it pushes you to to really pick up your game and
totally
and do so much better and really push yourself.
As we are on diver 44 of 46 in our second round of diving, and Shelly from Minnesota is still in the lead with a 113, and then Jessica Parada from IU with a 105.1, and Thelma Stromberg from Iowa with a 102.4. Really clean entry on that front 2.5 tuck. I thought she lost her legs a little bit. She could have been a little bit tighter on the kick, but I thought it was a really clean entry.
43.2.
So here we have Sarah Bacon, the last diver here in the second round.
Finished out the first round in second place with a score of 53. Let's see if she can keep up that same standard. A little bit of a shaky dive for Bacon. She went in a little bit short because she kept her head down on the come out.
48.3.
Yep, and you can see it in her scores.
Laura 203B.
Still enough to bring her back up to third place, though. Starting our third round with Shelly from Minnesota, still in the lead with a 113, Parado from IU with a 105, and Bacon from Minnesota with a 103.5.
And would you say within the Big Ten in diving, especially on the women's side, Minnesota and IU are probably kind of the standard to really meet?
Yes, I would say Ohio State, Minnesota, Purdue, and IU are the standard when it comes to women's diving.
Mm-hmm.
It's that intimidation factor when you know that, oh, someone from Minnesota, someone from Purdue or IU are going to be at that competition. It's like, all right, that's when you have to step your game up.
29.9. Lauren, 203C.
Lauren Lepeter from IU, the second of two U of I, second of two University of Illinois divers, doing a back 1.5 tuck, washing over. You can see that reflected in her scores. That's some of the toughest part about backs and gainers is that blind entry, whereas on a fronter and inward, you can see the water as you're going through.
Right.
Or as you're going to line up for the entry, but on a back or reverse, you can't. It's all based on that spot. So when you come around in your somersault and you see the water, it's all a confidence, and it's almost a guess of where you see that, and then you anticipate where to put your feet and then come out, which is what makes, the saying goes, is like backs and gainers win a meet.
Yeah.
Anyone can do a good front or inward or twister, because all those are going to be visible entries.
Yeah.
It's the people who can put down a back and a reverse that are really going to excel in the competition.
And so I know you kind of talk about sometimes you have visual cues. Is the 1 meter dive, is there enough time while you're in the air to kind of have that visual cue? Or is it just basically I'm looking for the water and I'm going to trust that I'm in the right spot?
That's what makes 1 meter sort of tricky, is on 1.5s, it's harder based on the rate that you spin. It's harder to pick up a spot, because if you see that visual cue on a 1.5, it might be too late. Whereas on a reverse 2.5 or back 2.5, you're going to see the water twice. But on a 1.5, it's basically just a game of anticipation.
Yeah.
Shelly, 105E.
And then Shelly from Minnesota, our leader after 2 rounds in this 3rd round of diving, will be doing a front 2.5 pike. One of her higher degree of difficulties. It's a little bit by. I thought that was a little bit of a miss for the Shelly standard. She had good height. I thought she just waited a little bit too long to come out.
58.5.
Yeah, I think of her 3 dives, that's the one that probably will have.
Still rewarded with her highest score. Granted, it is the highest degree of difficulty, but a 58 is still very strong in women's 1 meter competition.
Mikhail.
172.45 is the current score to beat in first place with Shelly from Minnesota. Mikhail Bauer, the IU senior. Mikhail's another one of the divers that you've really seen grow as time has gone on. She's sort of broken out into that field as one of those big names to know in USA diving.
Yeah, another person who maybe a bit more of a late bloomer into the nationals stage, kind of like you talked about. And, I mean, development, that's so important.
Absolutely. It takes time for... You go from your junior diving into your collegiate diving, and it takes some time for a college coach to break down the bad habits that you had as a junior diver.
Right.
But it's coming just in time for Mikhail.
.25. Anna, 203B.
Anna Filippic from Nebraska,
Contrary to Austin saying no one cares, I care a lot.
doing back 1.5 pike. On back, you'll see a lot of the girls do the same
Just
back,
I don't want to hear you guys talk about
back
it.
and reverse. So you'll see a back 1.5 pike and a reverse 1.5 pike. I thought that was good. I thought she knee saved a little bit late, which caused that sort of up splash. But when it comes down to such a game of consistency, there's not a lot of room for errors, especially on those backs and gainers where the girls are all doing the same dives. Occasionally, you'll see a girl throwing a reverse 2.5, which is more of a dive that men do. I think we have one girl who's competing reverse 2.5 in this competition, which, if she can hit that dive, is a huge opportunity to catapult up in the standings.
Right, it can be a game changer.
As time goes on, you sort of see women's diving changing. You see what traditionally was all just the 1.5s. Now you have girls from all different schools. So there's a woman at Purdue who's doing front 3.5 tuck on 1 meter, which is usually a woman's 3 meter optional.
Right.
And they're bringing it down and doing optionals that men are doing, which is absolutely crazy. And then you see the men's game getting even harder.
And do you think some of that is just maybe the strength and development of these big-time programs? They're able to kind of develop their divers to be a little bit more stronger, and they're able to execute these types of dives?
I think it's the overall improvement of these upper-tier programs. You see all the top coaches right now are using some sort of video analysis app. They have specialized weight coaches who are working individually with each diver. It's everything. It's nutrition, everything all coming together, which just makes for a stronger, sturdier diver.
Yeah, and you see it at the highest level in the Olympics. You know,
Absolutely.
Even from, you know, you think about maybe 2008, 2004, where the diving has come in, you know, 8 to 10 years has been
Absolutely.
really impressive.
In 2008, you didn't need men's 10 meter. You didn't need a front 4.5 somersault to win. You didn't need a back 3.5 pike to win.
Right.
The diver Matthew Mitchum in 2008, who won from Australia, won it doing a front 3.5 pike, which is one of the easier men's front dives. Now, if you do a front 3.5 pike, if you were to do that in 2016, you're basically already out of the game.
Right.
So you need those bigger dives. You see guys doing inward 4.5 now, triple in on 10 meter. Back 3.5 pike is a given. You need that to be competitive.
Keegan, 5134D.
Northwestern with a reverse 1.5 pike, leaving it a little bit short. She pressed her legs at the right time, but she just dropped them, which sort of caused that backsplash on the water. Elizabeth Etterman, the other Minnesota diver. Again, with that, just leaving their feet a little bit short. There's not that much of room for error like that, especially when it comes to an event that is just so precise when you have a lot of the same dives being repeated. There's not that much room for error.
Right, and I think we touched on it at the beginning of the broadcast. Of these 46 divers, only 16 will advance. 9 through 16 go to the consolation finals, and then 1 through 8 will have the finals tonight.
Yep, and then the consolation final is right after this preliminary event. Up next, we have Miriam Camus, the Minnesota sophomore. It's full twisting 1.5, 2.2. That was very good for Camus. What you want to look for in these twisters is that there's no sort of movement in their legs. They want to be glued together, and then they're square going in on the bottom. When you get into the more difficult twisting dives, you can see a lot of the times a diver will just do a slight twist on the bottom, and sometimes they can get away with it. A judge won't catch it, but if it's significant enough, it can reduce their score significantly.
And that's where you talk about it's so important, especially on the 1 meter, to stick your landing.
Yeah.
Or entry, I suppose. It would be entry.
52.8. Emily, 203 deep.
Emily Meany, the Purdue freshman. A little bit of a rough second round dive. Let's see if she can come back on this third one. Back 1.5 pike, 2.3. .27, 27, struggle round for Emily Meany, getting 4s on that dive.
And that was something we had talked about, is that you have to wonder if maybe her confidence was shaken on that second dive.
It's so hard to get out of your head after you have a bad dive.
Right, and you talked about, so much of it is mental, and it's easier to say, okay, I'm just not going to forget about it.
Right.
But once you're back on the board, it's hard. It does kind of creep into your mind.
Because you just want to hit that next dive. You want to make up for all the lost ground that you just had. That's especially when a bad dive comes later in the competition. If you can have such a solid showing up until that, and then you come down to the last 2 dives, and your second to last dive you miss.
Right.
That's sort of like the true mark of a really great diver, is like them coming back and hitting that next dive after they make a mistake. Halfway through round 3, we have Shelley from Minnesota with a solid lead, starting to pull away from the pack with a 172.45. And in second place, Parado from IU with a 153. Third place, Morgan Meixner from Purdue with a 146.75. Meixner made a huge leap from that last round. That was really solid off the board. You saw her feet leave the board a little bit on that back press, which is called a crow hop, which the judges won't necessarily deduct for. It's just preferred if you don't.
Right.
See, a lot of these divers are taped up all over their body too. Since diving is such a, I wouldn't call it a contact sport, but it is such a physically straining sport. You're hitting the water on 10 meter at 35 miles an hour. The board is pushing against you. You have so many different forces pushing and pulling against your body that a lot of the times divers will have pulled muscles or wrist injuries. So that's why you see a lot of these divers all taped up.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's different than if you're just swimming for fun and you're just doing the real basic dive off of the springboard, as opposed to, like you said, all the twisting and turning and hitting the water at that speed. It doesn't feel great. It still hurts.
Injury comes with excellence. Vince Panzano, the former Ohio State coach, now does a lot of sort of freelance coaching around for USA Diving. And one of the things that he's talked to my team about is we'll get very frustrated about how our injuries will inhibit our practice a lot of the times. And I've heard him say, if you're not injured, you're not practicing hard enough, because those injuries almost naturally come with elite level diving.
Yeah, because if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're going to have pain.
And what separates those great divers is how well that, even if you're in pain, how well you can execute while being in pain.
Right, and a lot of that goes back to the mental factor. It's the ability to not only block out the noise around you, but also, you have to be able to ignore that maybe you've got a pulled muscle someplace.
Right.
To the best of your ability, of course.
Of course, there's always the excruciating pain where you can't ignore, with the broken bones, the torn ligaments, or anything like that. But Steele dove on a broken ankle, not a stress-fractured ankle, and that's one of those things where he wasn't gonna let it inhibit how he trained.
Yeah.
A lot of the times you'll see in platform divers is they'll get bad inflammation of their triceps, which is something that I really struggle with. So you'll tape up, you do everything you have to do, and then it's sort of
36.4.
suck it up or go home.
Right, like you at this point, at this level, you know, you gotta just kind of take it.
Right, because there are so many people who are chomping at the bit to just take that one step to overtake you.
Right.
Solid dive by Thelma Stromberg from Iowa. I thought she still left it a little bit short. That sort of seems to be a recurring pattern, as these girls tend to just leave a hair short or a hair over on it, which is when you see a really good dive, you know that's straight in.
Right, and so for you, is it more frustrating to just be a hair off or to just completely miss on it?
I'll take just being a hair off any day of the week.
But it's definitely annoying, right?
Absolutely, especially when you're trying to, with the Big Ten, especially men, is so competitive right now. So any little mistake can drop you from like second place down to 8th. But it's easier to come back from such a small miss,
right?
Because then you can just hit the next dive. Whereas if you just completely tank on your stomach or on your back, then there's not much you can do.
Right. You'd rather come back from a 2-point, take off than a 10.
Absolutely.
45.6. Aaron, 203B.
So we are on diver 36 of 46 here in the third round of dives.
Erin Scanlon from Northwestern. You see her pull her shoulders a little bit back, which caused that distance back from the springboard, which already sort of sets the judges up with a skeptical mind, and then lost her feet a little bit and washed over on that entry. That was a very, very good takeoff by Alyssa Black from Rutgers. I thought her height was great. Again, just pressed a little bit early.
4.4. Kristen, 303B.
Kristen Hayden from Michigan doing reverse 1.5 pike. Kristen, again, one of those girls who just has incredible height off the board. I thought that setup was what she set that up for greatness, and then just might have gotten a little bit excited in the air.
Yeah, but you could definitely see, you talked about, she's got that powerful spring up.
Samantha Reese, the Purdue junior. Sam is the oldest on the Purdue women's team, so she sort of acts as the leader and the mother of the team. Good dive by Sam Reese. I thought when we talked about earlier that knee save where they pull, when they start to go a little bit over on a back or reverse entry, they'll pull those knees down. I thought she executed that very well.
41.4. Jacinta, 303B.
Jacinta Thomas from Iowa now with her third dive. This is diver number 40 of 46.
Great dive by Jacinta Thomas. Really clean entry, great height.
50.4. Haley.
Next up, we have Haley Allen from Ohio State, native of Midland, Texas, trained out with John Proctor while he was the City of Midland's dive coach. John Proctor is now the Florida State coach. Disappointing dive for Haley Allen. Just really short. I thought the takeoff could have set her up for a very good dive. Again, it comes down to when you're in such a tense environment and you get anxious. A lot of the times you'll get excited in that dive where you're just so focused on, I want to hit this dive, I want the crowd to cheer. It's hard to overcome that nerve.
18 even. Madeline 301B.
And so now Madeline Kuhn from Illinois.
Madeline, again, one of those girls who is a platform specialist, doesn't have a lot of experience on springboard.
$21.25. Alessandra 203B.
Alessandra Murphy from Michigan. Great dive. That's the sort of mark that you want to look for on a back 1.5 pike. You'll see a lot of these back 1.5 pikes, reverse 1.5 pikes, since they are lower GDs.
It's reflected in the score.
Right, so you'll see a lot of 40s, 45s, and then when it's really good, you'll see it bump up into the 50s. And then finishing out our third round is Sarah Bacon, the freshman at University of Michigan. Sarah should be a sophomore, but she took a gap year while training, so this will be her first year of eligibility. Beautiful line, good setup. And then that's the sort of standard that you're going to see from those Minnesota divers.
And you see it there, she's rewarded with that 40.
Breaking into the 50s on such a low degree of difficulty. Finishing out the third round, final standings are Shelley from Minnesota with a 172.45, Sarah Bacon from Minnesota with a 153.9, Jessica Parado from IU with a 153.4. So you see that second and third spot between Bacon and Parado already battling it out with only half a point separating them.
And you talked about we would start to see kind of the separation from the pack, and right away we've got the top three have really kind of separated from everybody else.
Absolutely. Already 7 or 8 points ahead of 5th place.
Lauren 303C. Callie 203B.
Kelly Head, the senior at Iowa. Callie's one of those platform specialists that is starting to take on springboard. Solid dive by Callie Head.
46 even. Addison 303B.
Solid dive, a little bit heavy on the entry. Again, going back to that sort of level of consistency. There's not a lot of room for error.
48 even. Olivia 203B.
Olivia Rosendahl from Northwestern, sophomore. Good dive by Rosendahl. Olivia was in that top 8 position last round.
Monique 203B.
current leader after 6 dives in round 4 is Rosendahl with a 191.7. And here's our leader after 3 rounds, Shelley from Minnesota. Last round score of a 172.45. So really, she needs less than 20 points to jump up into first place.
Yeah, she's put herself in good position.
And she will definitely get it. Great setup. You can see the patience that she has coming off the board, waiting to get into that twist, which initiates the somersaulting action. And there she goes, right back up into first place with a 224.95. Mikhail, the returning senior from IU. You see a lot of these girls dancing to stay loose in between dives. Great dive by Mikhail. Now we're starting to get into the higher degree of difficulties going towards the later half of the women's prelim.
Right, and so between the prelims where we've got 46 divers versus, you know, finals where there's only 8, which is harder, you know, in between dives? Is it having that much time between dives in the prelims where you have to stay loose?
Personally, I like finals more because finals are more like a practice, which is something that a lot of coaches preach going into any competition, is that you don't want to change your routine from practice going into the finals.
Right.
So in a prelim, you're never going to have 30 to 40 minutes in between a dive unless you're doing some sort of like mock competition, which a lot of divers will do. But in the final, it's you get out of the water, you talk to your coach, take a few minutes to dry off, and then you'll be up in the next few divers, especially in an 8-person final. Great dive by Anna Filippic from Nebraska. Again, one of those divers who just gets massive height, especially on a back takeoff.
Rachel,
You sort of see the energy of the crowd die down as the excitement sort of wanes going into the later half. Jessica Parado, the IU Olympian, having a really solid showing on 1-meter springboard for being a platform specialist. A little bit long, but I think she made up for it with such good height. They won't dock her too much.
46.8.
46.8, still getting 7.5s.
Yeah, still though 24 points behind Shelley, who has really set herself apart in the last couple dives.
And that's the really cool thing about prelims going into finals. A lot of these girls can just have an absolutely phenomenal prelim and then drop in standings in the final, and vice versa. You can see girls who just squeak into the top 8 and will go back and win the final.
Right.
In the ACCs right now, Ashlyn Peterson, who won the women's 3-meter this year, just snuck into that 8th place spot and ended up winning the entire event.
Right, and you know, it's so much of it is just you just want a shot.
Absolutely.
As long as you can qualify and have a chance to win, that's all you can really ask for.
The biggest example of that is David Badaya. He in 2012 snuck into that last 12th place position and snuck into the semifinal as 18th. But since the scores don't carry over, he just needed that opportunity to get in there, and then it's anyone's game that day when they come in and just turn their game on. Meixner dropping from 4th last round. Now she's in 4th, but we'll see her go down a few spots as people start to progress. Just goes to show you how accurate you need to be in these prelims. Janica from Northwestern with a lower degree twister of a full twisting 1.5. You'll see a lot of girls in the competition do a double twisting 1.5. Still well executed though. On lower degree of difficulty dives like that, you want to make sure that you're really just drilling them.
Right.
A little bit back on the board. A really good recovery though. Like I said earlier, with that hurdle, if you can recover from having a good hurdle, that's really something that can set you apart from other divers.
She was able to do it there.
Mm-hmm. Good knee save by Miriam Camus. Good solid height and then really good reaction time when she felt herself going a little bit over and sucked her knees down. Good dive, blew up a little bit on the bottom. Probably didn't grab her hands or pike safe fast enough, but I think it'll still be solid. She'll be happy with that. 6.5s across. Here we go, the freshman from Purdue, Emily Meany, had a rough 2nd and 3rd round dive. Let's see if she can recover on this 4th round.
Emily 303B.
Beautiful entry. I thought she lost her feet a little bit, but I think that was the recovery that Meany from Purdue needed.
And that's impressive from the freshman. They're able to show the mental fortitude.
Absolutely. I think that's something that you gain as you get older, is the sort of ability to compete and your ability to overcome the pressures of competition, and I think it's good to see that out of such younger divers. Waiting on the scores for Meany.
Looks like we're still waiting on the official word on Emily Meany's scores for her dive. Take a look at the judges there.
Technical difficulties with the electronic scores.
Sometimes that can happen.
Again, another mental aspect of the sport of diving is that can happen to anyone, happen in the Olympics.
Right. And you can see Sewell there just trying to stay loose.
Yep.
A little thrown out of her rhythm, though.
Good to see her laughing, though. A lot of the times divers will get so worked up, and they'll keep themselves in this little bubble where they don't want to even show that they're human or show any sort of emotion.
Now you can see her interacting with her teammates there, trying to stay loose. Looks like we still have a technical difficulty with the electronic scoring. Hopefully we can get that resolved. Right there it is.
There we go. 44, so 6s and 7s across. I think that's a good little confidence booster for the Purdue freshman, Emily Meany. That's good. She was nice and square, and sometimes you'll see divers on those inwards or gainers get nervous about getting too close to the board, so they'll cast their body off to the side. But it's really nice when you can see a diver do a very good dive and it be square to the springboard or platform at the same time. Again, you see some of these back one pikes going short, going into the water. Just nerves of the Big Ten atmosphere. It's a competition, honestly, like nothing else that you'll experience.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, talks about nerves sometimes can get the best of you, and right there you see just not able to execute on the dive.
About halfway through our 4th round, we have Shelly from Minnesota has been maintaining her lead this whole time. Parado, the IU Olympian, with a 200.2 even, and then Miriam Camus from Minnesota jumping up into that 3rd place spot with a 193.15.
Judges awards 36.4. Christina Cowell doing 4th lead.
From our angle, it looked like that was a little bit close to the springboard, but again, like I was talking about earlier, she might have cast it a little bit to the side.
Judges awards 39.6. Ashley 303B.
Ashley Peterson, the senior from Wisconsin-Madison, again, another tower specialist down on springboard. Little bit of a disappointing dive for Peterson, flying over on her reverse 1.5 pipe.
Judges awards 31.2.
If you're just joining us, we are about halfway through the 4th round of the 1-meter diving prelims. Connor Hoke, Max Showalter, bringing you all the action on BTN Student U. So far, the story has been Shelly from Minnesota with a 2:24.95.
Again, we haven't seen much wavering by Shelly from Minnesota.
Judges awards 46.
And she really doesn't show a lot of emotion when she's up there on the board. It's very stone-faced.
I love seeing the sort of contrast between how the different top divers act in competition. Shelly is very stone-faced, doesn't show a lot of emotion, but divers like Rosendahl will very chipper and upbeat on the board, smiling at the judges, laughing and dancing.
It is just it's a difference in the mentality and
Totally.
the approach.
It's business versus play. really good dive by Tenenbaum with that really, really nice ride on the board, and then just casting slightly over to the left of the springboard, but I don't think the judges will dock her too much for it.
48 even, Selma 303B.
Thelma Stromberg, the freshman at Iowa, doing a reverse 1.5 pike. Really pretty line, but casting over to the right of that springboard. And a lot of the times when a diver will cast over, the way that the judge can tell is if they do make a splash, you can see the direction that their legs will sort of cast the water to.
Mm-hmm.
Lucy 403B.
Lucy Roberts, the University of Michigan divers, with one of her higher degree of difficulties, doing inward 1.5 pike 2.4. Again, dropped her head a little bit on that takeoff, but didn't affect the entry too much, just a little bit of a splash going over.
42 even, Aaron 303B.
That was a solid dive. Really strong legs. Makes it a lot easier for her to be able to push the board down and get that height off the board, and then placed her feet perfectly, getting an average of 6 on that dive.
Alyssa Black, diver number 37 of the 46 in the prelim field.
Now as we see sort of this 4th round coming to a close, it becomes more clear who's going to be in those definitely those top 3 positions, but then you start to see a little bit of movement coming in the 4th through 8th place, all basically 4 points apart from each other right now. Full twisting 1.5 by Kristen Hayden. Really solid, really, really good direction on the takeoff.
48.2, 46.2. Sam 303B.
Sam Reese, the junior from Purdue. Saw her hanging 10 a little bit, her feet hanging over the end of the springboard, but I thought she recovered from it well with a really, really solid entry on that reverse 1.5 pike.
46.8.
46, so yeah, a few 7s sprinkled in there. Good score for Sam Reese.
Even, Haley 303B. Katrina 403B.
as we go into our 43rd diver of round 4, Madeline Kuhn doing reverse 1.5 pike. Really good takeoff. Again, just leaving it a little bit short. That's sort of a recurring theme. Like I said earlier, as you'll see these girls get super, super good takeoffs and then just a little bit anxious or excited when they're in the air. Strong dive by Alessandra Murphy from Michigan. She's been one of those competitors who's been very, very consistent through the whole thing. Not a lot of error, but not like any major hits.
Right, and depending on how the rest of the field is doing, that can either help you or hurt you.
Absolutely.
If you're able to be, consistent, that certainly puts you in a position to have a chance to qualify, but at the same time, if you're not able to maybe hit one of those spectacular dives,
absolutely,
it can hurt you as well.
And you see that a lot on platform. In a platform final, you can see divers either just totally on, and the winner just has an outstanding performance, or the winner was just someone who stayed very consistent, didn't hit anything but didn't miss anything, which is the total nature of diving.
Sarah Bacon, our 46th and final diver of round 4.
Really good setup by Sarah Bacon. She's one of the few girls that you see do a reverse twister in this category, or in this competition. Usually you'll see girls do a front or a back twister, but the reverse twister is higher degree of difficulty. So our standings after our second to last round, we have Shelly from Minnesota with a 224.95. In second place from Minnesota, Sarah Bacon with a 212.4, and in third place from IU, Jessica Parada with a 200.2. The 8th place cutoff for the final is a 188 going into that final round. So we have some competition fighting for those 7th and 8th spots.
Which is something that, you talked about as early as the first dive, that we would see kind of the top 4 would really start to separate themselves, but that bottom spot, that 7 and 8 spot, there would be an intense amount of competition.
And this is where you see what separates the women from the girls, so to say. You see those girls up in those top 3 spots, they're flying easy right now. They just autopilot. They don't even need a great dive. They just need a consistent, solid dive. But those girls in 7th and 8th, they can't afford to miss this next dive. It's make or break time for them.
Right, and this is, we've talked about it throughout the broadcast, how important the mental side of it is. If you're fighting for that 8th or that 7th spot or even that 6th spot, like, this is the point in time where you have to be able to mentally lock in and execute on this dive.
And that's when you see competitors, either they look at their scores or they don't, and this is one of those times where I think looking at your scores doesn't really help you, because it just adds an extra level of pressure that you didn't need, whereas the girls who are in the 7th and 8th spot could have no idea where they are in the standings. They know they're diving well, and they know that they just need to stay consistent going into that. It doesn't add the extra pressure of, oh God, I want to make this final, I'm in that position.
Mm-hmm. Probably know that you're in contention, but maybe not necessarily where you stack up.
Olivia Rosendahl, one of those contenders for those last 2 spots, sneaking into the final, so let's see what she'll do. Ending with an inward 1.5 pike, one of her higher degree of difficulties. And a little bit of a miss by Rosendahl. You see she had a very good setup. She's angry with that. She grabbed her cap and she slapped the water because she knew she let up those points that were oh so valuable. 39.6, 4.5s for Rosendahl. Might have been enough just to let that spot in the final slip right through her hands. Up next is Shelly from Minnesota, our current leader after 4 dives.
Shelly 53.33D.
Just needs a consistent last dive. Nothing special, nothing flashy, but with Shelly, you never know. This could be just a spectacular dive.
Right.
Ending with one of those reverse twisters, just like her teammate Sarah Bacon did to close out our 4th round with a 2.6. And a solid dive is what it was. That's really good height, really good aerial work, just a little bit heavy on the bottom rolling by, but she is very easily in first place with a 280.85. Like you said earlier, that NCAA qualifying with the 265, Shelly easily with a 285.85, finishing out that prelim.
Yeah, definitely clearing that with ease.
36.3. Mikhail 51.32D.
And really, I mean, like you said, those top 4 spots, probably not going to see too much variation there. They probably feel like they're in a pretty good position to make it into the finals.
Into the final, absolutely.
It's those bottom 4 that I think are really kind of the interesting parts.
And you see Mikhail Bauer a little bit over to the right side of the springboard, but with a good recovery, like I was saying earlier. So it's a bunch of split-second decisions that make for a great diver, and I think she recovered well from that.
We'll see what her scores show.
42.9.
You see a few of those judges saw that she traveled to the side, but I think she did a really good job of masking it. A little bit splashy, a little bit choppy after that 1.5 twist of squaring down into that somersault, which made it a little bit harder for her to get all the way around.
Anna 51.34.
Anna Filippic, the senior from Nebraska. Good height and a really, really solid double twister. Again, one of those higher degree of difficulty twisters that you'll see the women in this 1 meter do is a 2.6 and a 53. She's rewarded for that. Up next is Parado from Indiana University, the 2016 women's platform individual and synchronized competitor for Team USA.
Another one who really just needs a solid dive here to pretty much cement her spot in the finals.
Absolutely. And Parado took a gap year last year to train for the Olympics, and just to train for the Olympics. So now she's breaking back onto that college scene with a really, really good double twisting 1.5. Getting 7s across, and that'll pay off for her.
That puts her in second place right now.
Up next, we have Morgan Meixner, who was one of those competitors who was fighting for those top 8 spots after a small miss in her 4th round dive. So let's see if Meixner can come back and put the heat on. Lower degree of difficulty with a reverse 1.5 somersault with 1/2 twist as opposed to 1.5 twist, which is what you saw Shelly and Sarah Bacon from Minnesota do. A little bit back on the board and a little bit short. So like I said earlier, though, it's going to come down to just who brings it on this last dive.
37.4.
37, a little bit low for Meixner, so that's going to put her in 7th place. So let's see if she can stay in that 8th place, in that top 8 spot going into the finals.
225 even. Keegan, 303 B.
Keegan McCaffrey from University of Michigan.
Janica, 104E.
Front double pike. You don't see a lot of feet first entry in this competition, but it is a good middle ground for girls who have to do
41.4.
a harder front dive.
33D.
A little bit of shakiness in the air on that reverse 1.5, 1.5 by Elizabeth Ederman from Minnesota. You saw that sort of tilt of the axis back and forth.
33D.
Here we are almost halfway done with round 4. Shelley still in basically the untouchable position of first at this point with a 280.85. Parado in second with a 253.5. And then Anna Filippic from University of Nebraska with a 240.3. We have that 8th place spot right now with the cutoff of a 226.85, but I have a feeling like it will end up being a little bit higher than that.
Right, and you have to imagine with that top 8, the way it shakes up right now, we know more than likely Sarah Bacon's going to end up somewhere around that top 3, top 4 spot, which is going to probably push that to at least 228. Probably that 231 mark is going to be the spot to beat.
Absolutely, and Miriam Camus with a great dive who I think will secure her a spot in that top 8, just bumping Meixner down now to that 8th place position.
As you see on the scoreboard there, the 9 through 16. 203 right now, the spot to beat just to get into the consolation.
Yep. Up next, we have the freshman Emily Meany from Purdue.
45.1. Emily, 52.33D.
A little bit of a rough last dive for Meany, pulling her shoulders back a little bit and struggling to get her legs up to finish that final somersault.
41.25. Madeline,
A good experience, though, for the freshman Purdue diver on 1 meter after only being a platform specialist.
And you can see there, Max, in the top 8, the 231.15 mark now, the spot to beat to get into the finals.
Struggling a little bit to get in her pike position. Still bringing it in a little vertical, though.
27.6. Alexandra, 51.32D. Christina, 51.32D.
A little over the halfway mark here in round 5. Christina Crowell from Penn State.
Good height and solid finish for Christina Crowell from Penn State, ending on a easy and safe dive of full twisting 1.5.
52-33.
Ashton Peterson, the senior from Wisconsin. Looks like this will be ending her final Big Ten championships on 1 meter with a pretty solid back twister. 2.5 of back 1.5, 1.5.
45.
Gives her a 2:13. That might be enough to get her into the consolation. 2:03 was the cutoff. As it stands right now, though, the finals for tonight on the 1 meter, the score to beat is 2:31.15. You're on diver 31 of 46.
53-31 D. Lexi, 51-34 D.
Yeah, we are in our 5th round, going in with our last round still left to go. We have 6 rounds.
So still one more dive for everybody.
Absolutely.
You know, still, so that 8 spot right now is that hotly contested spot. Even that 7 spot, which is only, you know, just a fraction higher at that point from the 8th. So I'm sure we'll see a lot of action in this continuing in this round and then into the 6th. Yeah.
Heidi, 52-33 D. Lucy, 404 C.
Lucy Roberts now, her 5th dive. She is the 35th diver of the 46 that we have.
We see girls with 6 dives on 1 meter, 6 dives on 3 meter, and then 5 dives on platform.
Aaron, 52-33 D.
Aaron Scannell with that dive.
37.5. Alyssa,
Diver number
52-33
37
D.
in our second to last round of diving is Alyssa Black, doing back 1.5 somersault with 1.5 twist and 2.5, one of the higher degree of difficulty twisters that you'll see done in this women's 1 meter preliminary. Kristen Hayden, the freshman from Michigan, doing 51-34 double twisting 1.5, a 2.6, one of the harder twisters that you're going to see done. Really good stretch up the line, good setup. A little bit cockeyed in the twist, but then ends up getting it really square with a solid entry. I think she'll be pretty happy with those scores.
52 even.
And that score for the double twister for Kristen Hayden is a 52.
That puts her into that 7th spot. Has to be pretty happy with that going into the last round.
And then our junior from Purdue, Samantha Reese, with a back 1.5 somersault with 1.5 twist. Her highest degree of difficulty twister in her list. You see her lost her legs a little bit, travel a bit to the side of the board, but I don't think it should affect her too much because she did have a pretty clean entry.
45 even. Jacinta, 51-32D.
A little bit slow on the somersault, which in turn makes the dive look a little bit
39.6.
lazy, which the judges can sometimes take off for.
31D. Katrina, 52-33D.
Kuhn, our 43rd diver of 46 here in the 5th round.
A little bit short by Madeline. A good takeoff, but again, coming out a little bit early and leaving it a little short.
37.2. Alessandra, 403D.
So right now that top 8 spot with the cutoff of a 231.30 by Rosendahl from Northwestern.
Morgan, 52-33D.
Morgan Justice, our 45th diver.
A solid dive by Morgan. Going into this last round is where you really start to feel the energy of the place either make or break. You see girls who are right on that cusp feel sort of like the blow of disappointment. And then the girls who are lucky enough to sneak into that top 8 spot get another chance to prove themselves in that final. Sarah Bacon finishing out our 5th round with a double twisting 1.5 with a 2.6, same dive we just saw Hayden do from Michigan. A really, really solid dive by Bacon. A little bit out in the pool, but overall a very good setup and very clean entry on the bottom, which is what you want to look for in this women's 1-meter event. Finishing out our 5th round, we have our current leader of Shelley from Minnesota with a 280.85. Second place from Minnesota, Sarah Bacon with a 265.7. And then third place from IU, Jessica Parada with a 253.5. The cutoff for that 8th place spot going into this final round is Kristen Hayden with a 233.65. And 7th place just above her with a 234.
Yeah, it's that 7th and 8th spot are going to be hotly contested.
26.25. Mackenzie,
We'll make for some interesting dives here from a number
Absolutely.
of our divers who are right on that that edge, and we've been talking about it. It's that mental capacity. It's that ability to block that out and just go out and execute your dive.
And then followed right after this event of the women's 1 meter preliminary, we have the women's constellation final for spots 9 through 16. So those who are not able to make it up into the 8 through first place positions will compete for, still able to get their team points in spots 16 through 9. And that last round cutoff for 16th place was a 221.35. And again, the split last round from 14th place all the way up to 8th was only about 5 points. So it's anyone's game who can get into that top 8 spot. But one thing for sure is that Shelly from Minnesota doesn't need anything spectacular. She is sitting pretty in first place right now.
Just a solid dive will do what she needs.
We have a dive change on the board by Olivia Rosendahl from Northwestern. Again, one of those contenders going into this final round. Last place was in 9th with a 231, less than 2 points behind Kristen Hayden for that 8th place spot.
So here, probably going with a higher degree difficulty, really trying to see if she can't jump into that top 8.
Changing it to her higher degree of difficulty, a reverse 1.5 somersault with 2.5 twists, the only girl in the competition doing this dive. And it absolutely paid off for her. You hear the crowd go wild. She did that. That was a last-minute change on the board to a 3.0, which was a risky move for Rosendahl. And it absolutely paid off for her.
And you can see on her face how excited she is.
58.5. That is exactly the dive she needed in order to put her up in that. She's in 2nd place now, right now, with a 284.45. Excuse me, 289.
Yeah,
current leader of a 289.80.
Should be enough to keep her in the top 8.
We'll see what Kristen Hayden does in her last round dive. Up next is the leader after 5 rounds, Shelly from Minnesota. Only needs 4 points right now to overtake, 9 points right now to overtake the current leader, Olivia Rosendahl. Ending with an inward 1.5 pike. One of her more consistent dives. Absolutely great final dive for Shelly from Minnesota.
56.4.
Yeah, that's about as good as you can ask for there. 56.4 puts her pretty firmly into first place. Like you said, she just needed something solid. Don't really have to get too creative on it.
Whereas you saw Rosendahl in that last round get creative because she did what she needed to do.
And it will be interesting to see how Kristen Hayden, who's our 38th diver, who's kind of battling with Rosenthal in that for that 8th spot, what she does if she changes the degree of difficulty on her dive as well, and if she's able to pull it off.
Mikhail Bauer, senior at IU. Again, off a little bit to the side, that right-hand side of the board. It looks like she's favoring that side a little bit, but ends with a really solid front 2.5 pike. I think she'll be happy with that.
54.6. Hazel, 52.25D.
And that bumps Mikhail Bauer right up into that 3rd place spot with a 285.75. Anna Filippic, senior from University of Nebraska. Very solid final dive by Anna Filippic. A reverse 1.5 somersaults with 1.5 twists, a 2.6 degree of difficulty.
54.6. Rachel.
Puts her into second place currently with a 294.90.
Jessica Parado, our current 8th place cutoff, with a 253.5. Parado still yet to dive, as well as Sarah Bacon in 6th place, still yet to dive with a 265.70.
So with those two still to dive here, you have to imagine that that 257.60 is going to be the cutoff.
We have Jessica Parado ending out her women's 1 meter Big Ten preliminary now with a back 1.5 somersaults, 1.5 twist. And that is absolutely enough to get her into that final position. A really, really great final dive by Parado. Really good height, good speed of twist, and a very pretty clean entry.
43.75.
A 43.75, ending her with a 297.25, 40 points behind Shelley from Minnesota.
And as it stands right now, 1 through 7 have all qualified for the NCAA automatically with a 265 or better, and Sarah Bacon hasn't even had her last dive yet.
So the 265 cutoff is for the NCAA zone qualifiers, which qualifies you onto your national championship, which zones will be later this early March, excuse me. Morgan Meixner again in 12th place last round, but still only 2 points outside of that 8th place cutoff. So let's see what she'll do here, ending with an inward 1.5 pike. And a really, really solid dive for Morgan Meixner to end out her preliminary
50.4.
with a 50.4, which will bump her up to 278 in 7th place. So we know that unless Sarah Bacon were to fail her last dive, Morgan will at least end in 7th place.
Keegan, 52.25 D.
You take a look there. You've got the 9 through 16, 233.55 is the cutoff.
Going into that consolation finals.
47.25. Janica, 105C.
And the women's 1 meter consolation finals, for those that finish in the 9th through 16th places, will compete immediately after the women's 1 meter preliminary, whereas those who come in spots 1 through 8 have a little bit of a breakup in between to go home, rest up, relax, get something to eat, and then come back fired up for the final at night.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to watch in that consolation as, you know, fatigue starts to
Absolutely.
wear on you, because you have, I mean, we've been going since 1 o'clock.
Absolutely. And you also have it in this preliminary, you have so much time in between dives to rest, get over if you had a bad dive, or just settle in, get ready for your next dive, whereas in the consolation finals and the finals at night, you only have eight divers, so you don't have that much time in between dives. about halfway done with our
39.6.
sixth and final round of the women's 1 meter. Miriam Camus, again, one of those women who were on the borderline mark of making the finals as opposed to the consolation final last round. Ends with a back 1.5 somersault, 1.5 twist, 2.5.
47.5. Abigail, 52.33D.
Moving Miriam Camus up to 5th place with a 288, and Morgan Meixner down to 8th place with a 278.95, which is the cutoff going into the final right now. Sarah Bacon in 9th, still yet to dive. Emily Meany, the Purdue freshman from Tasmania, Australia, ending out her first Big Ten 1 meter championships. A really, really solid finish for Emily Meany on that inward 1.5 pike. Degree of difficulty 2.4.
Had a couple dives that she struggled on, but she really did bounce back with those 5th and 6th dives and did a nice job of recovering.
Even had an 8 thrown in there with a 54 even as her score on that inward 1.5 pike. A shaky final round dive for Marin from Rutgers. Her inward 1.5 pike receiving 32.4.
We are on our 27th diver here in the final round of the prelims. Once again, the consolation finals will take place immediately after the end of the prelims. That will be the 9 through 16 divers. 1 through 8. For the most part, pretty set. Sarah Bacon really the only one left to dive that you have to imagine has a chance to really threaten to get into that top 8. Kristen Hayden, perhaps another one.
Kristen Hayden ending out that last round in 8th place. Rosendahl is switching it up by changing her last round dive from a reverse 1.5 somersault with 1 twist to a reverse 1.5 somersault with 2 twists, jumping from a 2.6 up to a 3.0. Seemed to really pay off to her and sort of put the pressure on Kristen Hayden.
I have to imagine that that's going to give her some confidence, too, going into the finals, knowing her last dive, she nailed it. She was able to get into the finals with that.
Absolutely. If Rosendahl is able to make it into the finals, then she has the confidence already knowing that she can hit that last dive, which might have been shaky since it was a last-minute decision.
Mm-hmm.
Are you joking?
39.6. Alana, 52.31 D. Lexi, 52.33 D.
Lexi Tenenbaum from the University of Minnesota, ending with the back 1.5 somersault with 1.5 twist, 2.5 degree of difficulty. Lexi with a 229.45. Let's see. Again, one of those girls who last round was in that final contention, and with a really, really, really strong final round dive. Let's see if that's enough to bump her up into that 8th place position.
52.5.
And it is.
It is.
53.31 D.
A great dive there by Lexi Tannenbaum. Puts her in that 8th spot with a 281.95.
Thelma Stronberg with a 227.6
34.1.
after awards with a 261.4.
35th diver Lucy Roberts now up.
Ending with an easier dive of a back 1.5 somersault with half twist. Looked a little bit tight to the springboard with her feet.
So as we get closer here to Kristen Hayden, who, like you talked about at the end of the last round, was in 8th place, you have to beat, probably need to beat 284.45 with Sarah Bacon still having to dive.
Absolutely.
Is it something where you're looking at that last dive and you're deciding maybe you want to change it as well?
A lot of the times, Rosendahl was sort of an anomaly in that situation. Is usually you train your list and you stick to that list.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly it paid off for Rosendahl. I think Kristen Hayden is set in the way of what her final dive will be.
So you just try to execute it to the best of your ability.
Absolutely, and I saw her warming up the reverse 2.5 in warm-up, which is, she would be the only girl in the competition doing a reverse 2.5, which again would match Rosendahl's 3.0 DD.
Right.
So whether she was saving that for the Big Ten final and she was just practicing it, we'll see right now as she steps up.
$50.7 for Alyssa Black on her final dive.
And there we go. We see she's going to stick with an inward 1.5 pike to end it out. She will need a spectacular inward 1.5 pike in order to jump up into that 8th place position. A solid inward 1.5 pike. I'm not sure if it is enough to bump her up into that 7th place position, which she'll need with Sarah Bacon still yet to dive. Puts her in 8th place.
8th place, 4/10 off of tying for that 7th spot.
Sam Reese, the junior from Purdue, ending with an inward 1.5 pike.
257.60, the cut up, the last spot in order to get into the consolation.
A little bit sideways on the board, and then just washing it over for Samantha Reese.
40.8. Jacinta, 51.34 D.
And then we have Jacinta Thomas from Iowa ending it out with a front 1.5 somersault with 2 twists, 2.6 degree of difficulty, leaving it just a little bit short with that back splash you could see towards the 1 meter.
The dive has been changed. Haley, 51-32D.
Haley Allen changing her final round dive from a reverse 1.5 somersault with 1.5 twist down to a full twisting 1.5. Less degree of difficulty, but clearly a more consistent dive for Allen on that last dive with a really clean entry.
41.8. Katrina, 52-25D.
Back one somersault with 2.5 twist and 2.7, one of the higher degree of difficulty twisters that we've seen in our 6 rounds of diving. Madeline from University of Illinois, ending with her front 2.5 pike, her highest degree of difficulty in her list. And a really solid last round dive for Madeline.
46.8. Alessandra, 105C.
As it stands right now, that 16th place cutoff is a 259.8. Sarah Bacon in 14th, still yet to dive with a 265.7. Bacon was in second last round.
Morgan, 403B.
Morgan Justice, our 45th diver. Her teammate Sarah Bacon, the last one to dive here in the prelims. Like you said in that last round, finished second.
A really, really solid last dive for Morgan.
45.6.
Ending with a 246. And our final diver is Sarah Bacon from the University of Minnesota. To get into that top 8 spot, she really only needs about 19 points on this dive. And she'll get it so easily. A great final round dive from University of Minnesota's Sarah Bacon.
58.5.
That bumps her right up to second. So our final standings for the women's 1 meter: in first place, Shelley from Minnesota with a 337.25. Second place, Sarah Bacon from Minnesota with a 324.2. Parado from IU with a 297. Filippic from Nebraska, 294. Rosendahl, fifth place, 289. Camus from Minnesota with a 288. Bauer from IU with a 285. And Addison Makoviak from Rutgers with a 284.45 are your top 8 finishers going into the women's 1 meter finals.
And the big story there is Olivia Rosenthal changing her degree of difficulty, able to, jump into that 5th spot there and make it into the finals. It'll be interesting to see her tonight if she's able to carry that momentum forward.
Absolutely. It was a game time decision that absolutely paid off for her in the end.
All right, so we're going to take a short intermission here. Max, thank you for joining us for the prelims. We'll be back very shortly with the consolation finals. We're watching Big Ten Women's Swimming and Diving Championships on BTN Student